This is Bolivia, Political Crossroads, where we give a rundown and analysis of the developments in Bolivia's political landscape, starting with the controversial general elections held October 20th of 2019, which sparked a 3-week-long nationwide protest that eventually led to the resignation of ex-President Evo Morales. We'll continue following the developments through the new elections projected to be held in April 2020. Your hosts for this podcast are Ernesto and Paul Rackner. Ernesto, a La Paz native residing in Santa Cruz de la Sierra, is an experienced lawyer and political analyst who in the past has also participated actively in Bolivian politics. Paul, that be me, is an American-born Bolivian with a background in Latin American studies and also resides in Santa Cruz. We hope you enjoy listening, and we encourage you to share with others who you think may be interested, and also appreciate your comments, suggestions, and any feedback you may have.
So welcome to episode 5 of Bolivia Political Crossroads. Your hosts are Paul Rackner and Ernesto Machical, and we're here after a week off due to holiday activities. And there have been quite a few political developments, that's for sure, after what was more or less a pretty quiet week to go along with the Christmas holiday. We've seen there was a meeting last weekend in Buenos Aires where Evo Morales headed a meeting where what we thought was going to happen was they were going to choose a candidate, the MAS party, but that didn't happen. The meeting was a bit of a letdown, at least that's the way it's been perceived, where I think there weren't more than 30 people in attendance or something like that, where supposedly there was going to be a much larger number, at least in the hundreds, and that didn't happen. Besides that, we have the case of the strange case of the Spanish GEO officers, which is a special task force police from Spain, trying to reach the Mexican embassy or the residence of the ambassador of the Mexican embassy. They were hooded with dark sunglasses, hooded covering their faces, and at a police checkpoint right outside the residency, they were confronted and asked to show ID and didn't want to, and got verbally aggressive, tried to escape or did escape, running into at least one other vehicle and causing damage to that vehicle. They apparently left somebody inside the embassy. I think it was the person in charge of business relations for Spain, but it was a very confusing event. There's many theories, and one predominant theory as to what they were trying to do or why they were doing what they were doing. And there's an ongoing investigation at this point. There have been diplomatic officers that have been expelled from the country, both the Mexican ambassador and some Spanish diplomats, including the 6 officers that were involved in that operation. Mm-hmm. And well, beyond that case, we've got criminal charges against Evo Morales that have been presented for a number of different offenses, including separatism, overriding functions, where he, via telephone, participated in the inauguration of a public market in, I think it was in Entre Rios, in the Chapare region, mm-hmm. Acting as president to inaugurate a new market or basically what was a government-funded project, right?
Right.
Also for sedition and terrorism, and also I've seen news about charges being brought against him for planting evidence in the case of the Hotel Las Americas, the terrorism case from about 10 years ago, right, where some foreign citizens were basically killed by police forces, Bolivian police forces inside the hotel. Right. And that's been quite a controversial topic since it happened, up to 10 years later. And really things were never really brought to light. And then you've got the new survey by C.S. Morty about potential presidential candidates. And a lot of changes there with Camacho and Pumardi having made up. They did make up, and they announced officially that they will run together, Camacho as president and Marco Pumardi as vice president. The polls are not, at least prior to that news, weren't looking good for either of them. They both dropped by about 50% since the last poll that was released. Right. And of course, the Mas candidate, even though it hasn't been announced, would still at this point, at least is at the top of that poll, but not with any spectacular numbers, about 20%. So that's what's come out in the past couple of weeks. There's been plenty, at least really within the last week.
There's a lot.
Yeah, it's plenty.
There's a lot. There's a lot to talk about here. Right.
Where do you want to start here, Ernesto?
I think you started with the right issue. The meeting of Buenos Aires of the MAS under the leadership of Evo Morales. That I choose that because I think that's a crucial thing. One, I choose it because many people in Bolivia, and especially many analysts of the political world in Bolivia, and also many journalists, question, why do people go all the way to not only the Masistas, why do journalists look for news in Buenos Aires every day? When Evo Morales is no longer the president of Bolivia, there is a new president in Bolivia. There are many political leaders in Bolivia. There is an election coming forth, and there's people like Carlos Mesa. There's people like Camacho. There's people like Pomari. There's all sorts of people that are interested in being presidents. But everybody turns their head to Buenos Aires and see what's happening in Buenos Aires. I have heard some people. Well, there are all kinds of suppositions, but one main supposition is that Evo Morales is still present in Bolivia. He's not president. He's present in Bolivia in his spirit. His political spirit is still in the country. And don't forget, he has been the president of 14 years in this country. He was news every day, every single day during 14 years or almost 14 years. He was the main news. And it's hard to just forget about that. He's like a father figure in Bolivia, and the father goes away from home, but he's still in our spirit because we can't forget him very quickly. This is just to start with. The second point I think that you bring up is the crisis within the MAS. Definitely what happened in Buenos Aires points out to a crisis in the political party. Although Bolivians are used to Evo Morales, although that he's still a very important figure here, the party has a crisis inside. He was expecting
definitely
1,000 people there, and the show up was, some news agencies say there were 20 or 30 people, which is much less than 1,000. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. There were 100, but 100 is 10 times less than the number of people that were invited there. So what's happening inside the MAS? And you mentioned in your account something very important. They didn't choose a candidate. You're right. Mm-hmm. The intention was to choose the candidate. That's what he said. His position was that one. Evo Morales said, the leaders are coming. The MAS leaders are coming to Buenos Aires. We're going to have this meeting here, and we're going to choose the candidate to the vice presidency at this meeting. It didn't happen. It didn't happen not only because people didn't go in flocks. It didn't happen because some important people from the MAS from Bolivia on the different media said that they were not going to Buenos Aires because the candidate of the MAS had to be chosen in Bolivia, not in Argentina.
Inside Bolivia, right?
Inside Bolivia, yeah. That was the word of the actual president of the Senate, Mrs. Copa. Mm-hmm. Eva Copa said exactly that, and she's a very important person. She was not known like a month ago or 2 months ago, but now she's a very well-known person. She's the president of the Senate. She's second in command of the country. If our president flies away from Bolivia for 10 days, then Eva Copa will be our president for those 10 days.
Yep.
So that's how important she is, And she grabbed the microphone and said that, she said, I'm not going to Buenos Aires. I think the candidate has to be chosen inside of the country of Bolivia, not in Buenos Aires, because people don't have the means to go there. And this is something that has to be talked about and reached consensus with the basis of the political party, not only a couple of leaders in Buenos Aires. And not only her, somebody else also said this, and a different leadership.
Sure.
Mhm.
What I think is going on with inside the mosque that a lot of people haven't considered is that there's quite a bit of resentment towards, really specifically towards Evo Morales and towards the other high up party officials or authorities that fled the country and left those that stayed to clean up their mess, because it's been a disaster. It's been a mess. As I've said more than once, especially right after Evo's resignation, nobody wants to be a masista right now. They're not having a good time. As you just said, after, Evo being in power for 14 years and his party basically controlling everything that could happen within the country, all the branches of government, suddenly they're in an entirely different position. And so, part of Evo wanting to direct things from Buenos Aires is that's really a position that I think is unique to what they call the ala dura, right? The extremist, diehard Evo Morales followers within the party, and it hasn't been consensuated. So anyway, that's and really there's a lot. I think there's a lot of resentment there that a lot of people don't take into account. So sorry, I'll let you continue with what you were saying.
No, that's exactly the point. I would just underline one issue here, which you mentioned, but maybe being a little bit more specific. Because some of the people that from the press that interviewed Mrs. Eva Copa have really become experts in touching her weak points, And I have gathered the following: they tend to ask her where she hid during 13 years, right? Meaning that nobody knew about her, And this is true, And basically, she answers the truth, She says, it's not that I hid, They never showed me around because I was one of the peons there, one of the girls that were told what to do, but never asked what should we do, And she's very resentful in this respect, in the respect that she was just a person that received orders but was never asked what to do. And basically, what she's reflecting is that there were 10 people that ruled Bolivia during 14 years, and they were always the same people. And this is one of the main reasons why Evo Morales lost so much popularity. I don't know if his downfall can just be attributed on him. My perception is that it is probably more attributable to the people that surrounded him. Corruption was around him, not on him, not necessarily on him. But many of the guys that were around here were definitely corrupt people, were people very abusive.
Sure.
They just overran all the laws that were in Bolivia. And this gang, which was not a gang of 4 like in China, this was a gang of 10 probably, did everything. They did from the beginning to the end, they did everything every day. So all the rest of the people from the MAS felt that, yes, they were in government, they were part of the party that was ruling Bolivia, but they weren't really people that were on the press. They weren't really making the decisions. They just followed everything that these 10 people decided. And I think that's the grudge that they have, especially Mrs. Eva Copa. She's very clear about this. And what happened on that 12th of September when she was 12th of November when she was elected president of the Senate? I don't know. She doesn't explain this well. How did she get elected? But basically, what it seems to have happened in the Senate is that all the people that were left there, that were the non-important ones, if you want to put it in some more blatant way, the non-importants got together and they had to decide who's going to lead us. There was only one person that was important in the Senate at that point, and it was Mrs. Salvatierra. But she had everything against her because she had resigned, and she had shown herself in a big fight with the police people 1 or 2 days before the election of the Senate took place, and she looked like a brat. This is exactly what happened. She was a brat. And all these people were really annoyed at her, the senator. So when they got together, what was informed to the press is that especially Eva Copa told her, Mrs. Salvatierra, to not give orders, because she was nobody to give orders. She was no longer the president of the Senate.
Right.
And they had to elect a president. And I think everybody gathered around Mrs. Copa because of this position. Basically, she was very contestant to the established power of the MAS. She got elected, and that's what they got now. That's what we get now. An elected masista that is basically not receiving orders, or at least not direct orders from Evo Morales. She mentioned that throughout the 14 years, she had had one or two meetings alone with Evo Morales. Never again. She was just appealing. So basically, and this is one time that Evo Morales went to El Alto. She was the senator from El Alto. So that's the reason they had a meeting one or two times, I think, in 14 years. So this is her position. And yeah, the MAS is showing that it has two or three fractions that are definitely not together in the decision making. And all these different fractions told Evo Morales that they were not willing to go to Buenos Aires, and that they were not willing to elect the candidate to the presidency and the vice presidency in Buenos Aires. Yeah, that's basically what happened. And I think that's a very important issue. It's good that we reviewed it because it's very important, very important in the sense that now the MAS is going to go with a candidate. We don't know who the candidate will be, but whoever it is, it's not Evo Morales. And if it's not Evo Morales, there are going to be divisions in the MAS. Yeah, that's
Sure.
the outlook for the future.
Well, they say that they'll have I think they're going to have a meeting or an announcement, I think on January 19th, which is, I guess about 2 weeks from now. And we'll know then. At least we thought we were going to know last weekend, but we'll see what happens. Definitely that it comes down to Evo being out of touch with those within the party. And it sounds cliche, but with the people, right? And I think the next meeting will probably take place within inside Bolivia's borders, and if Evo participates, which I'm pretty sure he will, it'll be through video chat or telephone or whatever. Because I think it was probably he's out of touch, but I don't think he's stupid. And after his meeting, and the negative reactions to that within his own party, that they'll try to make some corrections. They have to.
Mm-hmm. But see, this shows you a fractured party, and I don't know how fractured it's going to be actually from the 19th on. But I don't think that whoever gets elected will have the capacity to unite the party as a whole. I think many people are going to be discontent, and I think, and the point is, and I think this leads us to another point in our conversation today. Many of the people that are not going to be happy with the results in the as far as who the presidential candidate will be, many of these unconformists will go outside and vote for Carlos Mesa. That's at least what I think. Maybe now we can talk about the polls and Carlos Mesa. But I think many of the people that are not happy with the MAS are going to flow to Carlos. That's my feeling.
But you're talking about not that those people aren't the diehard MAS supporters, but rather the soft supporters, let's say.
The base people, that's the question. What you're putting right now into discussion is very important, because who is going to flow out of the MAS and vote for Carlos Mesa? Definitely the soft masistas, definitely the people that are masistas, but not the hardcore masistas. The question is how many hardcore masistas are going to break with the MAS, and that can also happen. Resentful people. I have talked with some people that are not exactly from the MAS, but are very close to the MAS, and some of these persons believe that Choquehuanca, for example, is a man that is trying to fly by himself. I think that he's a hardcore masista, and everybody knows that. He's a deep an Aymara full-fledged. He's an extremist Aymara. That means that's like a Zionist Jew. He's a hardcore Aymara, right? And what I have heard is that he definitely wants to be the candidate, and if he's not the candidate, I see that as a probability of him not supporting another candidate, especially if that another candidate has corruption
Do you think you'd go? Do you think you'd try to go with another? In Bolivia, you can't run as an independent, but do you think you would try to find a way to run for a different party?
Yeah, that's the big question. See, that's what I'm trying to put right now into the discussion. It may be, as you say, you can't go as an independent, but there are a couple of political parties that will not have good candidates, and somebody like Choquehuanca can be a good candidate for any political party because he's a well-known figure. He's a left-wing guy, of course. He's a hardcore Aymara leader. That's of course also. And if he doesn't get what he wants and they don't try to talk with him and get him calmed down, he may break with the Muslim and go in a different, we don't know that, but this is just speculation. But it's a good speculation because he's a hardcore leader and he wants to be the candidate. And if they don't give him that,
he's got ambition.
Right. He's got ambition and he's into it right now. Yeah. I have even heard that he has an amount of money to do the campaign, money that comes not only from him, but from other sources that are financing him, so that are funding him. Mm-hmm. So, see, that's a demonstration that there's going to be some people that are not going to be happy with whatever happens in the next meeting. And this is normal. It has happened with the MNR in the past, The MNR in the past broke in 2 or 3 fractions because people were not happy with what came out after the first 12 years of government of the MNR back in the 50s and 60s. Then the MNR broke in 2 or 3 pieces. So that may happen within the MAS. I don't know. I'm not sure of that, but that's a big possibility, I think. Yeah, definitely. So,
talking about the potential candidates here, well, the only ones that have officially announced at this point, we're still looking at Carlos Mesa and Luis Fernando Camacho. Carlos Mesa running with Gustavo Pedraza, which hasn't changed since the elections in October. Right. And Camacho surprisingly making up, him and Pumardi making up and deciding to run together. What I mentioned at the beginning is that they both, at least if they were to run separately, compared to the last polls that put them both at somewhere around, I think it was around 12%, 12, 13. There wasn't a lot of difference between the two. Right. If they were to run separately. Now they're both at somewhere around, I think Camacho got 6.9 right. And Pumardi, here it is, 8.2. Right. So they've both taken quite a hit, at least if you trust these polls. Do you think they have any chance to? A lot of people said, if they ran together, they'd be invincible, and right. I might have agreed with that before the whole fiasco with the leaked recordings of their conversations and the damage that did to both of them. Do you think there's a chance for these guys to be serious contenders?
I think that the answer to your question is I don't think that they're the same as they were a month ago. Definitely, that has been diminished a lot. Their popularity has diminished significantly because of what they did. Both of them, not only one of them. So that candidacy is going to suffer from that. I have no doubt about that. But then again, who are going to be the strong candidates? I think that there's no doubt that the MAS, whoever is the candidate of the MAS, will be a strong candidate. But what does it mean to be strong today? It means to have between 20 and 30% of the vote. I think that the MAS will be around there, doing it good, I think it'll get 30%, and doing it not too good will get closer to 20%. The other good candidate or strong candidate will be Carlos Mesa. I have no doubt about that. And the third candidacy that will be strong is the Camacho Pumardi candidacy, but it'll be diminished. What does that mean? I don't know if it's 30, 30, 30, but it's going to be something like 30 MAS, maybe 30 Carlos Mesa. And Camacho, I think, will not be as strong as the other, the former two. I think it's going to be less, it's going to have less of number of votes, but it's going to be important. The big questions are the following. For example, what is going to happen with the party from Mr. Costas? Mr. Costas has a political party, and he Yeah, Ruben Costas. Yeah, he has his political party, and these are the Demócratas. And the Demócratas in the last election had a candidate. The candidate was Mr. Ortiz. He did very poorly, but still, today they're very important because this is the political party, ironically, running the country. In the elections of 20 of October, supposedly they got like 4% of the vote. They were the fourth political party.
Yeah, Bolochi.
Right. So first was Mas, second was Carlos Mesa, third was Mr. Ching, and number 4 was Mr. Ortiz. So these guys with 4% of the vote ended up running the country, which, as I said before, is a big irony. But that's exactly what is happening now. But my feeling is that if you look at the poll you're looking at, they have the pollsters have measured what the popularity of the actual president is of Mrs. Bonilla. Yeah, and she's very important. She's up there. I don't recall the numbers, but she's less than Carlos Mesa.
15.5.
Yeah, but see, she's
above Mesa. She's about halfway between Mesa and Mas. I'm looking at it. She's got 15.6. And the Mas is at 20.7. Mesa's at 13.8.
Right. She's the second one, right? She's the second one, right? So she's very important, and that's the political party we're talking about. We're talking about the Demócratas and Mr. Costa's political party. The big question is, what are the Demócratas going to do? And this is a big discussion at this point.
Áñez, I don't know if you saw this headline the other day. I didn't read the article, but it basically said that Áñez was publicly calling for a unified front or a unification of what have been the opposition parties against the Mas. And I don't know if she made that declaration before or after this poll came out, but it does kind of raise some, maybe some suspicions as to what could be going on, because I don't agree with that personally. It's not. I think we talked about this before. It's not good for any democracy to reduce itself to two parties. In oblige people, or to you're either voting for one party or the other. It's definitely good to have a wide variety of candidates, and but so it's kind of strange to me that she did that, because if you look at the polls, there's no if you trust them anyway. It's not like where those that don't want the Mas to win are at a big risk here. I don't think the Mas has much of a chance. They might get past the first round and there'd be a runoff. But in a runoff, if you look at these polls, and if you look at even at when in October, in a runoff, the Mas doesn't really stand a chance.
Right.
And so I don't know what the big what the concern is, or are there other motives to having a to making a statement like that?
I think there's a motive here. This is the situation within the Demócratas. You and many people in Santa Cruz, especially in Santa Cruz, not so much in Bolivia, people in Santa Cruz know for a fact that Mr. Costas has been declared enemy number 1 of Mr. Marinkovic. Mr. Marinkovic now lives in Brazil because he has gotten asylum in Brazil. He was part of the terrorism suit initiated by the Mas 10 years ago. And since then, he flew the country and got asylum in Brazil, and he lives there, and he has all this judicial processes going on in Bolivia. In absentia of him, he broke with Costas pretty badly. They have not only disagreements in political terms, but especially in ethical terms. Marinkovic accuses Costa of being a traitor, and he accuses Costa of being a traitor because he says that Costa knew about things that he never told the rest of the people that were involved in the Media Luna at that time. He basically accuses Costas that he knew that the attack at the Hotel Las Americas was going to take place on the day that it took place. The accusation was also, it coincides with the words of former Fiscal Sosa, who said exactly the same thing. He says, Mr. Costas knew all this, and that's why Mr. Costas's brother left Bolivia one day before the attack on the Hotel Las Americas. So what I'm trying to say is that there's a big fight here of enmity between Mr. Marinkovic and Mr. Costas. And apparently what has happened in the latter times is that Mr. Marinkovic had become very close to Camacho. And many people talked that Camacho was really a man of Marinkovic in the Comité Cívico of Santa Cruz. So, and apparently that is true, So what is taking place now is something that nobody planned. Once the whole process against Evo Morales takes place with fruition, successfully, what happened is that somebody had to be president. So when they went to the Constitution and revised the Constitution, the only person that could become president at that particular moment was Mrs. Janine Áñez. And Mrs. Janine Áñez is from the political party of Mr. Costas, the Demócratas. So actually what you have at this moment is a mixed government, with people that respond to the political party of the Demócratas, of Mr. Costas' political party, and a couple of people from the Comité Cívico, and these are people from Camacho. So there is a sort of a marriage in the government right now between the Camacho people and the Demócratas. Nothing that was planned before; it just happened that way. The big question is, what is going to happen in the election? What I have heard from people inside the party of the Demócratas is the following: there's a group of people that want to have a coalition with Camacho, and of course that puts Costas in a very difficult situation, because what's going to happen with Marinkovic there, and being Marinkovic a Camacho partner. And there's another wing of the party that is trying to convince the rest of the party to get in an agreement, in an alliance with Carlos Mesa. Apparently, the Demócratas are not thinking about having a presidential candidates by themselves, because of what Mrs. Áñez told before, because they don't want to divide the vote even more. Although you're correct, I don't think the MAS is a big enemy at this point, a big risk at this point. But especially in Santa Cruz, and I think the big issue is the Demócratas, whether they're going to go with Camacho or they're going to go with Mesa or by themselves, because I don't think that's ruled out totally. They're in a difficult position at this point, and that I think that responds to the question: why did Áñez said this a couple of days ago? Basically, I think this puts in an easier situation to the Democrats. If there's going to be a united front, they won't have to choose between one or the other alternative. They'll just go with the united front. I think she's pushing for that, but that's not going to happen. I don't think that will happen. It'll be very hard to have Carlos Mesa get into a united front if he's not the candidate, and it's going to be impossible to have Camacho to be part of a united front without him being the candidate. They're exclusive one from the other. I think Camacho and Carlos Mesa. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I guess besides the survey and what we're seeing with those tendencies, excuse me. I was looking at this deal with the charges against Abel, and how do you think as these develop, the processes that are being initiated against him? Do you think these are gonna move at a rate that precedes the elections, in the sense that if they start, how am I trying to say this? With these charges against Abel and the judicial processes that'll take place, do you think this is? It's kind of a political move, in the sense. I guess what I'm getting at is this going to hurt the MAS party in with the elections, or are these events going to take time? And usually justice moves very slowly in Bolivia, but again, supposedly it's an independent branch of government.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think there will be political motivations in terms of accelerating these charges and getting the ball rolling? And or what's your take on that?
Okay. I think that's a very interesting question. Before I go on to that, I forgot to mention something with regard to,
Sure, go ahead.
to the other issue. Because you put it there, and I think it's very important to elaborate a little bit more. I think there are going to be three big parties in the election: the MAS, Carlos Mesa, and Camacho. But here comes the interesting issue. As I was mentioning, if there are many people discontent with the MAS's presidential candidate, I think that support will erode and will go in favor of Carlos Mesa. Okay, I think I already mentioned that. But on the other hand, to the extreme right, the same is happening. Many people, as you mentioned before in the program, that were with Camacho a month ago are no longer with Camacho today because he has made so many mistakes. He has shown that ethically there's nothing to be expected on him ethically because he has made big mistakes on this field, and people are going to get away from him, and they're not going to vote for him. Who are they going to vote for? I don't think the former Camacho supporters are going to vote for the MAS. That vote is also going to go and contribute Carlos Mesa's candidacy. So I think Carlos Mesa is on the center right now, which is a magnificent place to be at, because the discontent people from the MAS are going to vote for him, and the discontent people for Camacho are going to vote for him. So my feeling is that Mesa is in a very good position at this point. He's quiet. He doesn't say a word. He hasn't mentioned what he's doing in Christmas and New Year's Eve. But he's having a great time because I think that he feels it. He is going to get a lot of the discontent votes from both parties on the extreme left and on the extreme right. And I think that's the
You don't think you don't think the extreme right is going to go and vote for Chia if he can find a party to back him?
Oh, I think in terms of Chi doesn't add too much to this because I think that it's the same voters. Chi's voters are Camacho's voters, which are the extreme right, very religiously oriented, basically the same thing. Yeah. I don't know if Chi is going to have his own candidacy, but if he's going to have his own candidacy, yes, you'll have many of the Camacho voters, the Chi voters. But that's the extreme right, religious right. Some people are not so religious.
And I guess that it takes away from Camacho. It doesn't do anything to hurt Mesa in any way or anybody else.
Right, exactly. Right. I think the extremists, if Chi is around, the extremists will probably vote for Chi. But many people that were supposedly voters of Camacho and that are now disappointed with him are not necessarily extremists in the religious sense, or extremists in the political. They're just people that felt had positive feelings vis-a-vis Camacho, and now they no longer do it. Some of these people that are not extremists are going to vote for Carlos Mesa. I already talked to some people of this sort. They say, no, I'm not going to vote for Camacho. We need somebody more serious, somebody that really understands Bolivia's political process, and that's Mesa. The more moderate and the more mature people are tending to do that. So basically, I'm saying that Mesa is going to benefit without saying anything again. Yeah, because that seems to be the main feature of his campaign. He doesn't say too much. He just poses and he irradiates seriousness, and people know him as a very important journalist in Bolivia. And well, there he is, benefiting from all these years of being what he has been, So I just wanted to make that mention because you mentioned that in Bolivia we don't need a two-partition political system. We don't need a bipartition political system. I think that I agree with you. It's not good. There has to be more than that for a choice. And I think that it'll be good to have 3 or 4 political important parties in Bolivia. And I think that Mesa will be the center, which we need so much in Bolivia at this point, because extremists from Camacho and from the MAS are no good for the country. They're violent. They are people that are not willing to negotiate with the other people, with the other parties. just what happened the last 14 years. And that's not healthy for a democracy either, you know. The judicial part, that's an important part, definitely, you know. You know what is ironic is that Evo
What's
Morales,
that?
during 14 years, you've heard him, Paul. What did he say? People that fly away from Bolivia because they have
Are criminals.
are criminals. And it's a confession. He said that this was a confession, yeah, because when they fly, they are confessing that they are criminals because they don't have the integrity to show up in court. Yeah, he has done exactly that. He's just flown away. With the difference, and very important difference, is that he has intervened and in the judicial system. He has put every one of the judges in the judiciary are put by him and his party.
Yep.
Paul, I know it. I know it for a fact. In Santa Cruz, they had a house full of lawyers from the MAS. The task of the people in Santa Cruz were to influence the judges in the department. They had criminal lawyers going after the criminal judges. They had civil lawyers going after the civil judges. That was their task. They controlled these judges all the time. They were telling them what to do, especially in the cases that had some political relevance. Not so much in individual cases which had nothing to do with politics, but all the cases that had to do with politics were definitely monitored by these people from that house in Santa Cruz, because they had, like, I don't know, 20 lawyers that were every day following cases, following basically not only cases, but judges in Santa Cruz. And now he's afraid of his own judges, you know? That's the ironic part. He put every one of those judges. Now he's not willing to come and face them. That judge, this government has not changed one judge in Bolivia, because it's hard to change judges. They're not people you can just fire them. You know, you need to initiate a process against them, especially in the higher echelons of the judiciary. There you need to finish processes in order to fire somebody, some magistrate in the higher court. You need not only to have a criminal case, you need to finish a criminal case, and then the guy will go out. Meanwhile, that doesn't happen. There are those judges are still there, and these are MAS people. But for some ironic reason, the MAS people are in the Mexican embassy trying to get away from Bolivia because they're not willing to go to a process in front of a judge that was put by them. That's the irony. Yeah.
Irony, but if you think about it, it raises two questions. One is how much, at least in my mind, if they're that afraid to face to face justice, let's say, it raises two questions for me. Coming back to the word resentment, how much resentment must there be felt by these judges that have been basically pressured and pressured, probably threatened, coerced to make certain decisions during Abel's time in power? Judges are supposed to be impartial, but at the same time, if they feel resentment, what's their ability to be impartial when they have to make a decision? And secondly, if they're that afraid, what amount of evidence, how strong are the cases that against them? Potentially, how strong could those cases be where that they're afraid of the judges that they put into power? And so I guess those two questions are sort of rhetorical and kind of speak for themselves in terms of.
No, but they're great points.
What we could expect.
The first point, I think, is fantastic, because you're right. These people are not only resentful because they had to obey. They are resentful because they were humiliated. If you're a judge, man, you don't need to be a judge in the Supreme Court of the United States in Washington, D.C. in order to know that you have to be independent. Any judge in the face of the earth during any time in history has the feeling that if he's the judge, he has to judge, but not somebody else. Even in the Middle Ages, if you were a judge, otherwise, why be a judge, right? Judges are there because they have this feeling that they have to do their task themselves. and not otherwise. You don't need a judge. You need the king to come and say, kill this guy because he's a traitor, and that's it. But if you put a judge, then of course judges have to have independence or some degree of independence. And when you take away, and that's the point that you touched, when you take away the independence of a judge in such a way, in such a manner that is so abrupt, so brusque, so adamant, what you're really doing is creating a big enemy, and so because you're humiliating a human being. And these guys that were ordered what to do when they were going to probably judge in a different manner because they felt that the proof was different, and they had to judge against their will. That's humiliation. And I think that's exactly what you're pointing out. And that's very interesting because that's what they're facing at, They're facing judges that were put by them, but are resentful to them because they humiliated them. And that's the ironic situation right now in courts in Bolivia. Yeah, that's an interesting point. How much can this affect them? A lot. A lot, because even if you're in a campaign, and even if the processes are long, a criminal case has it depends on the judge, on the intensity of the process. But if a judge wants to hurry up a case, then you would have what they call audiencias in English. This is called
hearings.
Hearings, yeah, you have hearings every 15 days, and every hearing is a drama, because in every hearing there a lot of things are in at stake, So every hearing will probably have all these people trembling, and it can affect them a lot, yeah, definitely. Which is what they did to Mr. Costas, remember, Mr. Costas was flying and doing a lot of things, and all of a sudden he was summoned in order to go to a hearing to see if he was going to be incarcerated or not. And then you would see who was a big macho man, all of a sudden turn into a little kitty cat, And this is literally what happened. That's exactly what happens to people, because when you're at the verge of losing your freedom, I don't know anybody that really stands like a hero to this. You need to be a hero in order not to get affected by this. People get affected. Anybody, Mr. Costas got affected, and I think that any Masista will get affected by this. Yes, it can be very troublesome, although the process is slow. Yeah.
So it's certainly not going to do them any favors to have all these cases against Evo Morales and other people within the party. I'm just wondering how long they're going to move these along, or how quickly they're going to move them along. The last thing I want to talk about before we finish up today is this. I don't know how much we can say, because at this point a lot of it's speculation, but the answers seem obvious to me. With what happened or what went down outside the residence of the former Mexican ambassador and the Spanish special operations police. I think I summarized this at the beginning. What do you make of all this? The predominant what's the word I'm looking for? Theory here is that these officers were sent to try and rescue or take Juan Ramon de Quintana out of the embassy and, basically save him, right? What seems really strange to me, everything about this seems strange, but if these are special ops officers, they're supposedly well-trained, and it doesn't seem like there was any kind of plan here. And it was extremely poorly executed. And in the end, it almost, I don't like to be a conspiracy theorist by any means. I'm not, but the way it was carried out so sloppily, and just that there was no logic to the way any of this was done. If you want to say that was their objective, was to get Quintana out of there. It almost seems to me like this
this could have been a show put on by the current administration is like a distraction tactic or something. I'm not saying that's the case, but again, it just seems like it was these guys were so stupid and so inept that's the only reasonable conclusion I can come to.
I want to ask you something. I know that you're much younger than I am, and you weren't around at the time the Bay of Pigs took place in Cuba.
No.
Yeah, I was a child. This was in 1960 or 61, I think.
60-something.
Yeah, but when I went to college, I had heard about the Bay of Pigs, but I had never really, I wasn't really into it. And I had a professor of political science that was very much into Cuba, and, he just tried to let us learn everything about the Cuban Revolution. One day we had this chapter in the book about the Bay of Pigs, and finally I was going to learn about it, and a long chapter, and a lot of explanation. But basically, what happened? Do you know what happened? How this thing ended up so badly in the Bay of Pigs? Do you have any idea about that? Have you ever dug into this?
I've got I kind of, I know the summary of the history what they teach you at school, but no, I've never looked into it.
Delved into the thing is, they had all this plan, and this is the CIA planning, and this is, I think these are the top people in the world doing this plan. So they planned and they took into consideration most of the things that could come up, So all of a sudden, then they execute the plan, and they had all these people going to the island, to Cuba, and disembarking in the shores. And the explanation was that they had not taken into account that there were swamps in between the shore.
There were what? Swamps.
Swamps, yeah, in between the shore and the city. You couldn't just run. This is exactly what happened, right? They got out of their vessels and they started walking, and all of a sudden they started sinking. Yep. And they couldn't move, and then all of a sudden, that was it. That was the end of the whole thing, They were clumsy, they had to turn around and leave again. That was the Pigs fiasco, It happens to the best in the world, This was a fiasco. I'm sure that they were there for the reasons that people say they were there. There is no other explanation. There is no other explanation because they came to Bolivia 1 or 2 days before what they did. Right?
It was just a few days after Morales. No, they actually came just a few days after Morales resigned. It was like the 14th or 15th of November, something like that.
Yeah, well,
which if that's what if they were coming to get Quintana out, then that would probably coincide with about the time he was seeking or entered the residence or the embassy.
Yeah, but see, they were not part of the bureaucracy of the Spanish embassy.
No, they were not part of that. Not by any means.
Yeah, no, by not that. Yeah, they just came one day because they had some special operation task to do in Bolivia. They came in. What the task was, we don't know. But now we sort of know. They wanted to do this. But they never planned on the neighborhood, I don't think they took into account that this could happen, that the neighbors would come out of their houses and start yelling at them, which is exactly what happened, They probably took into account the police people, and the police people are, in general terms, are more rational because if you speak to them, they will probably comply with you, or if they hear something more or less rational, it could be manageable. But not the neighbors, and the neighbors were expecting something bad to happen because they knew that these people were there. Yeah. So when they saw these people with their masks on, they went out running and started yelling. The girls started yelling and insulting the people. That they never planned. This is like the swamps in the Bay of Pigs. This is the Bay of Pigs, but this is the Spanish Bay of Pigs in La Paz, because they never took into account the neighbors. The neighbors were the unknown element. The girl started yelling, and the other neighbor came out with his.
They all started filming with their phones.
Filming everything, Man, these people could not move anymore. And once they started to react, because they didn't have a quick reaction, they started running away as if they had committed a crime. And then they even crashed with this taxi driver, So
Yeah.
everything was so stupid, and they didn't know. They didn't have to run, but they ran. They didn't have to press the clutch, so the accelerator so deeply, but they pressed the accelerator because they were just in a big hurry to get out of there because the girl never stopped crying, never started yelling, and the other guy never stopped screaming. So that was clumsy, and terrible for the Spanish, but terrible was the clumsiness, but terrible was also the idea. The cooperation of the new Spanish regime or government with Evo Morales is not good. They don't care who Evo Morales is. They don't care about the crimes that they have committed. They don't care about anything. They just apparently there is a debt from Podemos vis-a-vis the MAS, vis-a-vis Evo Morales.
Podemos is the Spanish version of the MAS.
Yeah, apparently they gave money from drugs. And this is something important before we close. Did you notice how many
well, even if it wasn't from drugs, I mean, just having your party financed by any foreign government is that's
it's illegal. It's illegal anywhere. Yeah, this is true. But see, when you have financing from, I don't know, Spain, it doesn't sound too questionable, because there are big enterprises in Spain running around. They have a lot of money. Some rich people can be financing any kind of strange ideas in the third world. But when you have a third world country like Bolivia financing a political movement in Spain, that's upside down, right? That's like journalists say, what's news? It's not news when the dog bites the man. It's news when the man bites the dog. And this is exactly what happened. How can Bolivia be financing a political party from Spain, which is just a rich country vis-a-vis Bolivia? It doesn't make any sense. And believe me, that money was not from taxpayers' money in Bolivia. Because we may have been in some good times in Bolivia, but not such big times as to finance a political movement in Spain. But regarding this last issue, check on the news. The last 2 or 3 weeks had been intense in operations against drug fabricas in El Chapare. The Minister Murillo is just, I think he has made a promise, and the promise is to just bust every one of the Chapare's drug factories that are in existence. He has undertaken, I don't know how many of these operations, but many. I'm surprised of this because it happened in the past, but not so much. Now it's every day. Every day you find out that there's a factory, a small factory or a big factory in the Chapare busted by the people from the ministry, from the police.
What they saw yesterday is, I think it was one bust. Yes, it was yesterday, I believe. Yeah. 32 tons.
Right.
Not 32 kilos, 32 tons.
Yeah. That's a lot. That's a lot. Yeah.
How do you hide that?
Right.
I'm trying to figure. That sounds like truckloads to me. But
right. But see, how much money would that report to the people in the Chapare? That's a lot of money, and that's a lot of money for the party also. So Murillo has finally reached the conclusion that that's what his task is. Attack the drug traffickers in the Chapare. He's doing it.
Yeah, hit him where it hurts.
Yeah, where it hurts, exactly. Yep. That's it.
And I wonder how much of that is really a long-term effort to reduce the production of drugs, or whether it's just kind of a way to call their attention and say, hey, you guys need to start playing ball. Because right now I think that the one big problem that I shouldn't say the one big problem, there's lots of big problems in Bolivia, but for this interim government is getting having a presence in the Chapare. I mean, it's part of the country. It's not. Lately, I've been thinking of the Chapare region as like this separate. What do you call it? In South Africa, there's two countries that exist inside South Africa. I can't remember the names of Lesotho or something. Right. Point being that one country exists inside another, and that's almost the way I look at the Chaparri right now. Is that in the government needs to find a way to basically be able to get them to cooperate and work with them, because that's kind of the thorn. That's the thorn in their side right now. Everybody's applauding this interim government, saying they're doing things right, and most things, not everybody is pro Agnes administration, but at least from, I think, any reasonable perspective, they're doing things about as well as could be expected given the circumstances. And what they've really had trouble with is getting things under control, if you will, in the Chaparri. So, all right, sir. Well, we've hit about an hour. I don't know if there's anything else you want to touch on.
Not really, nothing important, because I think we pinpointed all the important issues. We could always talk more, but I think we touched everything that was important and in its due dimension, and that was it. The big questions come out. Oh well, yeah. Now you know that on Monday, the Electoral Tribunal is going to formally show the country or show the calendar, the electoral calendar in Bolivia.
The calendar, the electoral calendar.
Right. So we're going to know for the fact that the elections are going to take place on the 3rd of May, I think. And if there's a second round, it's going to take place in June. And that means that the next session is going to be posicionado on the 6th of August. Right. Yep. That's it. This is it. Right, look, the next week we should look at that, because that's going to be news next week. Yeah.
Sure. Just some self-promotion here before we close. We did create a Facebook page. We've got it's called Bolivia Political Crossroads with Ernesto Machicao and Paul Rackner. So if you want to comment directly or share anything, suggestions for topics, anything at all, send us a message there. You send your comments, any interesting links, whatever you want. And we're happy to have that participation. So thanks, Ernesto. Always a pleasure. And until next time.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. It's always really a pleasure. And it was very learning and entertaining as usual. So until next week. Okay.
All right. Have a good week. Talk to you soon.
We'll be in touch.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.